In the heart of gritty 1980s London, a crew of hardened criminals dared to attempt the impossible. Breach the Brink's-Mat Depot, a high-security fortress said to be unbreakable. With inside help from a trusted guard and a plan crafted with meticulous precision, they were ready to risk everything. But once inside, what they discovered went far beyond their expectations, a fortune so vast it would change their lives and the criminal world forever. What was meant to be a clean hit spiraled into a gripping saga of betrayal, violence, and an unprecedented manhunt that would test the wits of Britain's finest detectives. As authorities closed in, these men faced a haunting question. Could they escape not just the law, but the dark shadows that now threatened to consume them all? The Brink's-Mat Heist, which took place on November 26, 1983, was meticulously planned over several months and ultimately became one of the largest and most infamous robberies in British history. The mastermind behind the heist, Brian Robinson, was an experienced criminal figure in London's underworld, known for his ability to orchestrate well-executed crimes. This heist, however, was unlike anything he had attempted before. He required more than just a group of skilled criminals. He needed precise information and an inside connection to pull it off successfully. That connection came through Anthony Black, a trusted security guard at the Brink's-Mat Depot. Black was in a unique position. Working security at one of the most fortified storage facilities in the UK, he had intimate knowledge of the depot's layout, security protocols, staff routines, and the timing of shift changes. But his personal life provided an unexpected vulnerability. Black had family ties to Robinson. Through these connections, Robinson approached Black with a proposition, knowing the guard's financial struggles could make him susceptible to the allure of a lucrative payday. To carry out the heist, Black began feeding Robinson details over several weeks, using conversations and pre-arranged meetings to convey the information. Black shared maps of the depot's interior, explained the security measures in place, and identified potential weak points in the building's defenses. Crucially, he revealed the specific times when the vault would be open and most accessible, such as during shift changes when staff attention was momentarily divided. Robinson recognized that gaining access to the depot itself wasn't enough. The gang would need a strategy to neutralize security measures, quickly control employees inside, and remove the valuables efficiently. Black's knowledge of the internal workings and his ability to signal the best timing for entry became the foundation of the heist plan. He pinpointed the morning shift change as their optimal window, a brief moment when the vault would be unlocked and employees would be transitioning. As Robinson and his right-hand man, Michael McAvoy, assembled their team, they understood that a successful heist would require careful rehearsal. They recruited a small group of trusted associates who would be capable of handling the logistics of the heist without drawing attention. In abandoned warehouses, they practiced for hours, running through every step they would take once inside the depot. The men were drilled on their roles. Who would control the employees, who would secure the vault, and who would handle the transport of stolen goods. The plan was designed with military precision to minimize any possible mishaps. They practiced controlling potential hostages and rehearsed how to respond if any unexpected alarms went off or if employees tried to resist. Each man knew his position and movements down to the second, creating a coordinated approach for when they entered the facility. The gang knew that entering a secure depot required more than stealth. It required the ability to overpower any resistance. Robinson and McAvoy arranged for firearms to be available during the heist, although violence was to be avoided if possible. They understood that the threat alone would be enough to control the staff, as firing shots could raise alarms or attract unwanted attention. One major logistical challenge was transporting the stolen items. Originally, the gang anticipated a cash haul, so they prepared a vehicle that could discreetly carry the expected load. However, they were prepared for some flexibility, with plans to adjust based on what they actually found inside the vault. In the days leading up to the heist, Black coordinated with Robinson to finalize the exact timing and the best entry point. As the gang waited on standby, Black's role became critical. He was to give the signal when the moment was right, alerting Robinson and McAvoy that the shift change was underway and the vault was accessible. On the night before the heist, Black, Robinson, and McAvoy met one last time to go over the plan. By this point, each member knew his role intimately, and every step had been carefully calculated. As they reviewed the layout and discussed contingencies, the reality of what they were about to attempt weighed heavily on them. They were not just planning a robbery, they were about to attempt one of the most audacious heists in British history. In the early morning hours of November 26, 1983, as fog settled over London, the gang gathered in a quiet location near the depot. Dressed in dark clothing, with gloves and balaclavas to mask their identities, they waited for Black's signal. Robinson and McAvoy ensured that everyone was prepared for what lay ahead, reminding them that their success depended on absolute precision and swift execution. With the clock ticking, the gang took a final moment to steel themselves for what was to come. This was not a mere gamble for cash. It was a highly calculated, meticulously rehearsed operation designed to break into a supposedly impenetrable facility. As the signal came through from Black, the gang sprang into action, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether their plan would go down as a legendary success or a catastrophic failure. Here's Chapter 2, focusing on the execution of the Brinks Mat heist, with detailed descriptions of how the gang gained access, subdued the staff, and made the surprising discovery of gold bars in the vault. As dawn broke on November 26, 1983, the air was heavy with the tension of what was about to unfold. Outside the Brinks Mat security depot near Heathrow Airport, the gang gathered in silence, each man focused on the role he'd been drilled to execute. They knew their timing had to be flawless, their actions precise. There was no room for error. Waiting for the signal from Anthony Black, the trusted security guard on the inside, they steeled themselves for what was to come. The plan was set in motion when Black, positioned inside the depot, signaled that the coast was clear. Dressed in dark clothing and masked to conceal their identities, the gang approached the depot with quiet determination. Black had left a side door unlocked, exactly as agreed upon during their planning sessions. Moving quickly and without hesitation, the gang slipped through the door, entering the building without alerting any security systems. They knew from Black's descriptions that once inside, they would need to subdue the guards on duty as swiftly as possible to avoid any alarms. The depot's layout was fresh in their minds, memorized through Black's detailed descriptions and floor plans. They moved purposefully down the narrow, dimly lit corridors, keeping their movements quiet to maintain the element of surprise. As they reached the main security area, the gang split up, each man taking his assigned position. McAvoy and Robinson, as the leaders, took charge of confronting the staff. Upon entering the main security office, Robinson and McAvoy encountered two guards who were taken completely off guard. Before they had a chance to react, Robinson produced a firearm, aiming it directly at the guards while McAvoy barked orders, instructing them to comply. The gang had agreed that no shots would be fired unless absolutely necessary. They understood that the threat alone would be sufficient to control the situation. The guards were restrained and tied, forced to sit in a corner with their hands bound behind their backs. Robinson reminded the guards to remain quiet and assured them that if they complied, they would not be harmed. His tone was controlled, but the message was clear. Resistance would be met with severe consequences. This moment of subduing the depot's staff was crucial, as any struggle or noise could lead to an unexpected security breach. Once the guards were secured, Black led Robinson, McAvoy, and the rest of the gang to the vault area. According to Black, the vault would be unlocked during this shift change period, a critical window that the gang had meticulously planned around. With the guards silenced, the team approached the vault, expecting to find a significant haul of cash. As they reached the heavy steel door of the vault, Black quickly checked the corridor for any additional staff before signaling to the others. Inside, the vault was organized in rows of high-security cages containing valuable items, cash, jewels, and other high-value deposits from various banks and businesses. Robinson and McAvoy pushed open the door, their faces a mixture of anticipation and controlled excitement. However, as they moved inside and began scanning the vault, they were met with an unexpected sight. In addition to cash, they discovered something they hadn't anticipated: gold bullion. Stack upon stack of solid gold bars lay before them, shining under the harsh lights of the vault. The sheer weight of the discovery hit them immediately. This was more than just a cash heist. They had stumbled upon a fortune beyond anything they had imagined. The initial plan had centered around stealing a large quantity of cash, an operation they were well prepared to handle. But with nearly 3 tons of gold, approximately 6,600 pounds. In front of them, they faced a decision that would ultimately reshape the heist. Each gold bar weighed around 27 pounds and was worth a small fortune. Taking the gold would mean additional time, extra load, and the need for more caution on their way out. The risk of discovery was heightened, yet the reward was too immense to ignore. Robinson and McAvoy exchanged a glance, silently agreeing that the bullion was too valuable to leave behind. The gang quickly assessed the logistics, deciding that they would prioritize as much gold as they could physically carry without drawing undue attention on the escape. Moving methodically, they began loading the bars into the waiting van outside, each man working with swift precision to maximize the take. Each gold bar made a distinct clinking sound as it was stacked in the vehicle, a sound that filled the men with both excitement and urgency. With every load they carried, they understood that their chances of getting caught increased. Yet the sheer magnitude of their haul pushed them forward, the lure of life-changing wealth overpowering any fear of discovery. Once they'd loaded as much gold as they could manage, the gang took one final look at the vault. In a matter of minutes, they had claimed what would amount to approximately 26 million pounds, or nearly $200 million today, in gold bullion. Satisfied with their haul, they secured the van and prepared to leave the depot. Black remained behind, ready to cover his tracks and make it look as though he had been an unwitting victim of the break-in. As the gang exited, the enormity of their theft began to settle in. They had not only breached one of the most secure facilities in Britain, but had managed to walk away with a fortune far exceeding anything they had anticipated. However, with the unexpected gold haul came an even greater challenge: evading capture and moving the gold without arousing suspicion. Their successful entry, swift subduing of the staff, and decision to seize the gold bullion marked the beginning of a heist that would soon capture the attention of international law enforcement. But as they vanished into the early morning fog, a question loomed large. Would they be able to escape with their lives, or had they taken on more than even they could handle? As the gang drove away from the Brink's-Mat Depot on November 26, 1983, their van was weighed down by nearly 3 tons of gold bullion, glinting in the dim light of early morning. London was still cloaked in darkness, and the streets were empty, as they navigated carefully mapped back routes to avoid any potential security checkpoints or police patrols. They had just executed one of the most audacious heists in British history, but the thrill of their success was quickly tempered by a stark reality. They were now in possession of an enormous haul of gold that was impossible to move or spend without a well-coordinated plan. Once they reached their safe house, the gang took stock of what they had accomplished. Originally expecting a large cash haul, they had instead found themselves with gold bars worth approximately 26 million pounds, around $200 million in today's value. The magnitude of the gold's value and sheer weight of their loot presented immediate logistical challenges. Unlike cash, which can be easily divided and circulated, nearly 6,600 pounds of gold bullion required careful planning to transport, conceal, and eventually launder. Each bar, stamped with identifying marks, would be traceable if not carefully managed. In the days following the heist, the gang quickly recognized that they couldn't keep the gold together in one place. Dividing the bullion among the members became an initial priority, reducing the risk of discovery if law enforcement closed in on any one location. Each member took their share, storing it in garages, warehouses, and secluded hideouts across London. However, with such a significant haul, these hiding spots were temporary solutions. Sooner or later, they would need to convert the gold into cash. To achieve this, they had to carefully strip the gold of its traceable identity, removing the recognizable refinery marks and reintroducing it as clean gold on the market. This process required not only patience, but also a network of trusted contacts who could navigate the gold's transformation from criminal loot to legitimate currency. The gang quickly realized they didn't have the expertise to handle this alone, and Robinson and McAvoy began reaching out to figures in the criminal underworld who specialized in fencing high-value goods. The gang had anticipated the need for gradual laundering, so Robinson designed a plan that would avoid flooding the market with large quantities which could raise suspicions. Contacts were enlisted who could manage smaller amounts of gold, but even these batches represented significant sums. Each transaction had to be carefully orchestrated to avoid scrutiny, with legitimate business fronts brought in to provide a veil of legality. At first, small portions of the bullion were moved to quiet locations across London, where they would remain hidden until a buyer or intermediary could be found. But the reality of storing and distributing gold on such a scale quickly became a logistical nightmare. Every day the gold remained in London was a day closer to discovery. Word of the heist had spread, and the gang understood they needed a long-term strategy. This was when Kenneth Noy entered the scene. A highly connected figure in organized crime, Noy had experience in handling stolen goods and a reputation for his skill in laundering high-value assets. Known for his shrewdness, Noy saw the opportunity and agreed to help the gang smelt the gold, erasing any identifiable refinery stamps and reforming it into less traceable ingots. His cut would be substantial, but his skills were invaluable. Noy's role was pivotal. He orchestrated the operation from behind the scenes, using a well-organized network of associates and trusted contacts in the jewelry trade. By melting down the gold and reshaping it into unmarked bars, he effectively cleaned it, preparing it for sale in legitimate markets. This process was slow and methodical. To avoid alerting authorities, Noy arranged for only small portions to be sold at a time, sometimes even in foreign markets, ensuring that each sale went unnoticed. Alongside Noy, the gang enlisted John Palmer, a gold dealer who operated on the edge of both the legal and illegal markets. Palmer had his own gold smelting operation, and his business was one of the few in the UK with legal authority to melt and resell gold. This made Palmer's involvement indispensable. With Palmer's smelting business as a front, the gang now had the means to quietly launder gold on British soil. Through Palmer's business, small quantities of melted, unmarked gold were discreetly fed back into the market. Each transaction was carefully masked as legitimate business, with invoices and paperwork designed to look authentic. Palmer's knowledge of the trade allowed him to navigate potential red flags and keep each sale within legal limits, avoiding the scrutiny of law enforcement. But even with Noy's skills and Palmer's connections, the process was painstakingly slow. The gang could only move small amounts of gold at a time, and as rumors of the heist circulated in the criminal underworld, the pressure on the gang mounted. Authorities were piecing together the scope of the robbery, and the Brinks-Matt heist was now a high-profile case, bringing increased surveillance and investigations to London's gold and jewelry markets. The difficulty of laundering nearly 3 tons of gold began to take its toll on the gang. Constantly watching for signs of law enforcement or informants, they knew they were at risk with each transaction. Every sale, every smelting operation could expose them, and with Scotland Yard intensifying its focus on the heist, the gang had little margin for error. Despite their careful planning and methodical execution, the sheer scale of the operation had started to spiral beyond their control. Even the best-laid plans seemed vulnerable under the weight of the heist's notoriety. Suspicion simmered within the gang, and the pressure of avoiding detection while managing such a vast amount of gold created a strain that would test each man's loyalty and nerve. As weeks turned into months, the team found themselves navigating an increasingly fragile web of secrets, danger, and mistrust. The brilliant plan that had seemed so flawless on paper was beginning to crack under the weight of its own ambition. And as the authorities closed in, the gang would soon face a far more daunting challenge. Could they keep their spoils and their freedom as the net tightened around them? The Brinks-Matt heist sent shockwaves through London, captivating the public with its scale and audacity. £26 million worth of gold bullion had vanished from one of the city's most secure facilities, and with it, the reputations of both Brinks-Matt and the police were at stake. Tasked with solving this high-profile crime was Detective Chief Superintendent Brian Boyce, a seasoned investigator with Scotland Yard's Serious Crime Squad. Known for his meticulous approach and ability to analyze complex criminal operations, Boyce would find himself entangled in one of the most intricate cases of his career. Detective Boyce was a natural choice to lead the investigation. His reputation for methodical, unyielding dedication to his work had earned him the respect of his colleagues. A meticulous thinker, Boyce was known for his ability to connect seemingly unrelated details, making him particularly effective at navigating complex cases. He understood from the outset that the Brinks-Matt heist was more than a simple robbery. It was an operation that required precision, inside knowledge, and extensive planning. With such a vast haul, Boyce knew that the thieves were likely working with a sophisticated network of contacts skilled in laundering and distributing high-value goods. This knowledge set the tone for the investigation. It would be a chase not only after criminals, but after their financial and logistical webs. Boyce began by assembling a team of top detectives, each specializing in different aspects of crime investigation, from forensics to financial tracking. Together, they worked tirelessly, mapping out every possible lead. Their initial focus was on examining the security footage and questioning the Brinks Mat employees, particularly Anthony Black. Black's association with one of the robbers, Brian Robinson, quickly raised suspicions. Under pressure from Boyce's team, Black eventually admitted to his involvement, revealing key details about Robinson and Michael McAvoy, two prominent figures in London's criminal underworld. Despite identifying Robinson and McAvoy, the team faced a monumental challenge, tracking nearly 3 tons of stolen gold as it was laundered and funneled through London's underworld. The bullion's initial value made it a lucrative prize, but its traceable markings and sheer weight meant the gang needed to smelt and reintroduce it into the market without arousing suspicion. Boyce knew that following the gold's trail would be central to understanding the gang's movements and eventually catching them. Early leads suggested the gang had enlisted professional help to launder the bullion. Surveillance and informants hinted at the involvement of 2 key figures, Kenneth Noy and John Palmer. Noy, a criminal with a reputation for managing high-value assets, was known to police for his expertise in smelting and distributing stolen goods. Palmer, a gold dealer with ties to both legitimate and underground markets, had a legal business that could facilitate the laundering of melted gold without raising immediate suspicion. But knowing about Noy and Palmer was one thing, finding concrete evidence to connect them to the heist was another. Boyce's team soon encountered roadblocks that highlighted the sophistication of the criminals' laundering operation. The gold had been melted down and recast, erasing identifiable refinery marks and making it nearly impossible to trace directly back to Brinks Mat. From this point on, the investigation would rely heavily on surveillance, informants, and the piecing together of financial transactions that could reveal the distribution network. Boyce and his team uncovered that the gang had started moving portions of the gold out of the UK, funneling proceeds through a labyrinthine network of offshore accounts, shell companies, and front businesses. The criminals used these mechanisms to make it appear as though the funds from the sale of the gold were legitimate, complicating the financial trail. Many of these companies were registered in tax havens known for strict privacy laws, meaning that Boyce had to rely on cooperation from international financial institutions and law enforcement agencies, a slow and often frustrating process. The use of offshore accounts and shell companies enabled the gang to disguise large financial transactions as ordinary business income. Money from gold sales flowed through layered accounts across jurisdictions, from the Channel Islands to Luxembourg. Each layer added a level of anonymity, masking the identities of those involved and allowing the gang to convert their illicit gains into seemingly clean assets. Detectives examining the paper trail encountered dead ends at nearly every turn, with little ability to subpoena information from foreign banks and corporate registries. The gang's laundering scheme extended into property investments across the UK, especially in London. The Docklands area, then undergoing massive redevelopment, became a focal point, as Boyce's team suspected that proceeds from the gold sales were being funneled into real estate. Investigating these properties proved challenging, as many were purchased under corporate names linked to shell companies. Boyce's team began conducting interviews with financial officers, real estate brokers, and anyone who might have noticed unusual transactions. The investigation required persistence and patience, with detectives documenting each discovery and incrementally connecting the dots between the gold sales and property purchases. As Boyce's team delved deeper, they encountered the difficulty of infiltrating London's criminal networks, where loyalty and silence were highly valued. Informants were reluctant to provide details, fearing retribution from the tightly knit circles protecting Noy and Palmer. With each dead end, Boyce pushed his team to find new angles, knowing that even a minor breakthrough could unravel the gang's operation. The gang's caution in laundering the gold also became evident. They limited their dealings to trusted intermediaries and minimized interactions that could leave paper trails. Despite Boyce's efforts, finding concrete links between the gang members and the gold proved elusive. Days turned into weeks, and as the gang's web grew increasingly convoluted, Boyce became acutely aware that time was not on their side. But the pressure on Boyce's team was relentless. The public, the media, and Scotland Yard expected answers, and every lead they followed added more weight to the case. For Boyce, the investigation was personal, a chance to bring down a network that had taunted the city with its brazenness. He knew the criminals were watching closely, gauging the movements of law enforcement, and he suspected that the gang's increasing paranoia might lead them to make mistakes. As the investigation intensified, Boyce placed his faith in his team's tenacity, hoping they would uncover a crack in the gang's careful operation. The intricacies of the laundering network were daunting, yet Boyce and his team pressed on, knowing that the stakes extended beyond mere justice. The case had become a symbol of the police's resolve in the face of organized crime. The gang's moves were calculated, but as Boyce tightened the net, he sensed that sooner or later, their complex web of secrecy would unravel. What he couldn't foresee, however, was the fateful clash between law enforcement and one of the heist's key players, a clash that would escalate the stakes and bring unforeseen consequences for both sides. The Brink's-Mat heist on November 26, 1983, was destined to be legendary from the start. What began as an audacious plan to steal a cache of cash from a high-security vault spiraled into something much larger. Nearly 3 tons of gold bullion worth approximately 26 million pounds at the time, or nearly $200 million today. For the men who pulled it off, the fortune was staggering. But so were the risks they faced as they tried to launder and enjoy their newfound wealth. While Scotland Yard pursued them relentlessly, the gang faced a high-stakes game of survival, where any misstep could lead to ruin or worse. This is the story of how it all unraveled, piece by piece. Detective Chief Superintendent Brian Boyce, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for his dedication and razor-sharp instincts, took command of the case. From the outset, Boyce knew the scale of the heist was exceptional. This wasn't a random job. It required expert planning, insider knowledge, and a network of criminals sophisticated enough to handle such a high-profile heist. Boyce assembled a team of top detectives prepared to track every lead. The investigation turned quickly toward Anthony Black, a Brink's-Mat security guard with close ties to known criminals Brian Robinson and Michael McAvoy. As Boyce and his team applied pressure, Black crumbled, confessing to his role and implicating Robinson and McAvoy. Scotland Yard now had 2 prime suspects, but arresting them was only part of the puzzle. The stolen gold was the key, and tracing it was a daunting task. As detectives would soon discover, Robinson and McAvoy hadn't worked alone. They had recruited 2 of London's most notorious criminals, Kenneth Noye and John Palmer, to help transform the bullion into untraceable assets and ensure that the gold disappeared as seamlessly as it had appeared. Kenneth Noye was a master of metal and a figure well established in the world of organized crime. Known for his expertise in smelting and fencing stolen goods, he was an ideal choice to handle the stolen gold. Noye's reputation was that of a calculated and resourceful criminal who operated in the gray area between legitimate business and illegal trade. His involvement in the heist was both a stroke of luck and a curse. His skills allowed the gang to melt down the bullion, removing identifiable refinery marks. But his methods also brought him under the watchful eye of Boyce's team. Scotland Yard, well aware of his capabilities, placed Noye under surveillance, suspecting he would eventually lead them to the gold. In January 1985, Detective Constable John Fordham, part of the surveillance team, was stationed outside Noye's property. The night was tense, Fordham remaining concealed as he watched Noye's movements. But in the darkness, Noye spotted him. Confronting Fordham, Noye fatally stabbed the detective in a violent clash that escalated within seconds. When brought to trial, Noye claimed self-defense, arguing he believed Fordham was an intruder. The court, in a controversial decision, acquitted Noye of murder, though the public and law enforcement alike were outraged. However, Noye wasn't free of consequences. Evidence soon linked him to handling stolen goods, and in 1986, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Yet even from prison, Noye's influence lingered in the criminal underworld, and his role in the heist continued to haunt his record. John Palmer, meanwhile, had established himself as a reputable gold dealer with an uncanny ability to navigate both legal and illegal markets. Palmer's business provided the gang with a legitimate front through which they could discreetly reintroduce the melted bullion into the market. Known as Goldfinger, Palmer had a knack for turning questionable assets into clean money, using his smelting operation to make the stolen gold untraceable. But Palmer's empire extended far beyond the Brinks Mat heist. His timeshare fraud in Tenerife defrauded thousands, making him millions and putting him on the radar of both British and international authorities. Despite his success, Palmer's criminal empire began to crumble in the early 2000s. He was convicted of fraud in 2001, serving time for a conspiracy that had taken advantage of countless victims. Upon his release, he returned to the UK, but remained under intense scrutiny. In 2015, Palmer was murdered outside his Essex home, an apparent gangland hit that remains unsolved. The mysterious circumstances surrounding his death underscored the dangerous life he had led since the Brinks Mat heist. As for Robinson and McAvoy, the initial masterminds, they couldn't escape the consequences of their actions. With Black's confession, Robinson and McAvoy were convicted, sentenced to long prison terms. Unlike Noy and Palmer, whose names remained connected to organized crime long after their release, Robinson and McAvoy faded from public view. Their legacy, however, lived on in the annals of British crime, their daring plan immortalized as one of the greatest heists in the country's history. Anthony Black, the insider whose knowledge had made the heist possible, faced his own punishment. Once he confessed, his betrayal was undeniable, though his cooperation earned him a lighter sentence. His life after prison remained quiet, a stark contrast to the infamous role he had played. For Black, the heist became a shadow over his life, a decision that ultimately cost him his career, reputation, and freedom. The aftermath of the heist extended far beyond the individuals involved. The stolen bullion, after being melted down and recast, had been carefully reintroduced into both legitimate and illegal markets. Much of the laundered money found its way into the Docklands redevelopment, an ambitious project that transformed the area from a decaying industrial zone into a thriving financial hub. Ironically, this development, partially funded by the stolen gold, became a symbol of modern London. The Brinks Mat heist had fueled organized crime, but also reshaped the city's skyline, a curious legacy of a crime that redefined Britain's criminal landscape. Beyond real estate, the laundered funds spread across various criminal enterprises, from drug trafficking to weapons smuggling. The sheer volume of money funneled into organized crime expanded networks that would thrive for decades. By blending illegal funds into legitimate investments, the heist highlighted the difficulties of distinguishing between clean and dirty money, a lesson that would shape financial oversight in Britain for years to come. In response to the heist's success, British authorities implemented a wave of regulatory reforms designed to combat money laundering and high-value asset tracking. The incident exposed weaknesses in the system, particularly around the lack of scrutiny in high-value transactions involving gold and other precious metals. Financial institutions were required to adopt stricter reporting measures, and specialized anti-money laundering units were established within law enforcement to monitor suspicious activities. International cooperation also strengthened, as agencies recognized that large-scale criminal enterprises could no longer be contained within national borders. The Brinks Mat heist underscored the need for a more sophisticated approach to tracking financial assets, as well as the importance of transparency in markets that deal with high-value commodities. Offshore accounts, shell companies, and foreign investments became tools of scrutiny as law enforcement adapted to combating organized crime on a global scale. For Scotland Yard, the lessons learned would guide future investigations, preparing them to tackle increasingly complex criminal operations. The legacy of the Brinks Mat heist lives on, its impact evident not only in the criminals it created, but also in the law enforcement tactics and regulations it inspired. The heist was a stark reminder that even the most secure institutions are vulnerable, and that with the right connections and planning, criminals could navigate systems intended to protect against theft. For Kenneth Noy, the Brinks Mat heist was only one chapter in a life punctuated by crime and violence. After his release, he became involved in a road rage incident that ended in the fatal stabbing of Stephen Cameron. Fleeing to Spain, Noy evaded capture until he was extradited back to the UK, where he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Noy's criminal career was a testament to the depths of his ruthlessness, and his actions remain a cautionary tale of ambition unchecked by conscience. John Palmer's life, too, was ultimately claimed by the world he navigated. His murder, shrouded in mystery, marked the violent end of a career that had straddled the line between legitimate business and organized crime. Palmer's reputation as Goldfinger lives on, a symbol of his ingenuity and the danger that follows those who profit from crime. Brian Robinson and Michael McAvoy, the architects of the heist, may have faded into obscurity, but their names remain etched into the history of British crime. Their daring plan and its shocking success changed the way law enforcement approached security, laundering, and organized crime. And for Anthony Black, the insider whose betrayal made it all possible, the heist remains an indelible stain, a choice that led to the destruction of his career and life. The Brinks-Mat heist was a turning point in British criminal history, an event that reshaped society, challenged law enforcement, and left a legacy that continues to reverberate through London and beyond.